Saturday, the 24th of May, 2014. It was early afternoon, and I had only walked about 35 kilometres during the day, but as I walked across the bridge just west of Franklinton in Louisiana, I started thinking that maybe it was time to stop for the day. It might have been the lure of the beach along the river below me, or maybe it was just the fact that I was already tired after a hot day. Whatever the reason, I turned off the road, made my way down to the shade underneath the bridge and sat down to relax. I had only been sitting there for a short while when an elderly, slightly scruffy-looking guy rode down on a bicycle. "You planning to stay here over the night?" he asked. "Yeah, I think so," I replied, wondering who he was and if there was going to be a problem with camping the night. "No problem," he said. "I live here, but there's plenty of room." The guy turned out to be Jeff, a homeless man that had been living under the bridge for several years. His house had been condemned after Hurricane Katrina, and he had never really recovered from that economic hit. I didn't really understand all the ins and outs, but somehow his insurance hadn't covered the hurricane damage. Jeff had just come back from work. It was Friday afternoon, and he'd been paid, so he asked me if I was hungry and or thirsty. He was planning to head into town to buy something to cook for dinner and buy some beers. Did I want any? I said, "Yeah, sure," and offered to pay for it. But no, Jeff was adamant that I was his guest and that he would get what was needed. He cycled off and returned a bit later with a six-pack, some bread and a couple of steaks. I was just starting to wonder what we were going to do with the steaks when he disappeared into the trees next to the bridge, rummaged around there for a while and came back with a gas cooker. "Have to hide it in there," he said, "otherwise it gets stolen." Jeff proceeded to cook the steaks, and before long we were lying on the ground, enjoying the plain but very nice steak sandwiches and sipping a beer. It was a nice warm evening, and we slowly worked our way through the six-pack, swapping stories as we relaxed more and more. Just before sunset, a car came down the road, and a man climbed out and started walking towards us. Jeff immediately tried to hide the beer cans and looked a bit embarrassed. The man turned out to be the local pastor who had come down to the river to check on Jeff, partly to make sure he was okay, but I also got the impression that he was making sure that Jeff was sober. Jeff introduced me and we spent some time talking. When he was sure we were okay, the pastor said goodnight and left us to finish off the last cans of beer. Jeff and I spent a large part of the night talking about a number of topics, and we eventually fell asleep where we were, in the open, right on the riverbank. No pitching the tent that night. In the morning, we headed back over the bridge for morning coffee and breakfast at McDonald's, and I tried hard to get to pay for Jeff's order, but no, I only just managed to make sure I at least got to pay for my own. After breakfast, we headed back to the river, and I managed to persuade Jeff to do a short audio interview that I had planned to use on the podcast I was experimenting with at that time. Then it was finally time to get moving again. It felt strange to leave Jeff there under the bridge, and as I started walking west along the road, I again reflected on the fact that more often than not, it's the people with the least that are the most generous.